Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody here and want to step into our last discussion of the day. Once again, I think that's going to be a great tie-in to what we've discussed in earlier panels. Our industry's future with fixed odds. This panel is going to be brought to us today by the Horse Racing Radio Network with Mike Penna. And presented today by Michele Fischer. Michele founded Darting Star, LLC, which is a consulting firm specializing in horse racing. Darting Star's clients include the Hong Kong Jockey Club, Sport Tech, Betia, and the Equestrian Club of, and I've not ever, Riyadh, thank you. Prior to Darting Star, I know many of you are aware that Michele was the Vice President of Sales and Development for Sport Tech for many years. She also has experience in television, sports production, simulcasting, and race office operations. But also like to say that she is a graduate from the Business Administration School of Business, or the Business Administration College of Business at the University of Louisville Equine Industry Program. Michele Fischer.
It has been a great day of panel discussions today, and I want to thank all of you for sticking around for this last session. It's a really poignant topic, and we've been teasing it all day. A couple things I wanted to share with you. I've been asked, since I went off into my own consulting company, people have asked me, how did you name your company? Darting Star. It was my dad's first racehorse in 1944 when he was 17. And I have a picture of him in my office, so it reminds me of the roots of my horse racing. Let me find it. So last year, we were all in New Orleans, or a lot of us were, and I was chairing a panel, hosting a panel about sports wagering. And what does it mean to horse racing? A little over less than a year. Here we are. And on May 14th, 2018, where were you? They always ask these questions when we see these monumental disruptions in our society. Well, that was the day of the modern gold rush beginning, or the repeal of PASPA. New Jersey opened sports betting in June 2018 at Monmouth Park, and all these other states started filing bills. Sports leagues, they were scrambling to figure out, how are we going to monetize this? We saw the 1% integrity fee the NBA was asking for. It's been changed from various states. And there's really no ideal framework envisioned by all of the leagues as to how this would work. A little different than horse racing for the sports entities, because they enjoy a lot of benefits from sports wagering, even if they're not getting a percentage of it. They're getting TV rights increases. They're getting data deals, sponsorships, and it's fueling their popularity. They'd always been selling some of these rights to the European market that were already offering fixed odds, and this was just going to be a continuation. However, this attitude on the 1%, on do these sports leagues deserve compensation? It's an argument we in horse racing have made forever. We put on the show, we should be compensated. And this quote from Chris Christie, from our former governor of New Jersey, really sums up. This was at the National Council of Legislatures from Gaming States Conference this year. And he was talking about the leagues asking for a fee. And I'm going to say this because this is how a lot of people are going to feel about horse racing asking for anything. The leagues, the arrogance of the leagues, is the other thing we need to talk about. All of you, these are regulators he's speaking to, now are going to have these folks coming to your state capitals and arguing to you that they should somehow now get something for free from you. And they were unwilling to settle when they were in the midst of litigation. So the question we asked last year is, will horse racing benefit from a percentage of sports wagering? The overall answer is probably no. There are a few states, and I'll point to John Moss, who has is in the process of convincing his legislators why horse racing should receive a part of it. But this is not the same ball game we were in when racetracks were asking for racinos. It's different. And this is a list of some of the racetracks that are now offering sports wagering. They're up and running. And the only one that's a little different is Monmouth Park because it's horseman owned. We're not sure at this point, is there a benefit, is there not a benefit? And what I found really interesting is one of these tracks on the list, and it's a dog track, Wheeling Island, their sports book is on the opposite side of the building than their simulcast room. You can't bet on horse racing there, and you have to travel across the building. Well, what does that do for horse racing, you ask yourself? And these tracks, I'm glad they have it. They're benefiting by the number of people coming through the door, but do we see anything yet for horse racing? It's a question. The Wire Act. It's very interesting. The Wire Act is where we see the limitations of mobile and internet wagering on sports. It's limiting it to intra-state. And I think as the panel discussed earlier, that they've examined looking at our 1978 Interstate Horse Racing Act as a potential for the sports wagering. And, that's one thing. The other thing we're seeing is states are varying between should we authorize online or not? And statistically, online has proven to generate the most turnover, but some states, some tribal entities, they don't want it. They see it as we need to increase the foot traffic to existing facilities. In another twist, in January, the Department of Justice, they put out a legal opinion which said that that replaced the opinion that the Wire Act only applies to sports. And it sent a question on how online casinos, poker, daily fantasy sports, and online lottery sales, were they legal in this motion? So it's all interesting developments happening. And it's important to look at this kind of segue that we're making as the industry advances. So let's talk about cross-marketing horse racing in sports. Something that's not talked about is that I have seen a few sports operators be interested in adding parimutuel horse racing to their offering. Mississippi just passed some parimutuel rules. And in Atlantic City, which used to have approximately 8 casinos that had race books and is down to 1, which is the Borgata, they're starting to say, well, how could we have parimutuel horse racing back as a complement product? So it's a very positive development. We've seen a few U.S. bookmakers offer some fixed odds propositions on horse racing, and we're going to look at that in a minute. And it's important to look at other international jurisdictions where fixed odds turnover on horse racing is higher in that market than parimutuel. So here's where we've seen fixed odds offered in America on horse racing. At the Haskell, William Hill offered a few bets, and there were bets not available on the totalizator. They had head-to-head, margin of victory, and they had a parlay bet, which was part of 3 stake races, and a baseball game. It generated about $14K in handle. It was seen as a marketing piece. FanDuel at the Meadowlands offered similar proposition bets on the Hambletonian. So it's just kind of the beginning to see that there is some interest. And when you ask the operators there, why did you do it? Well, it was for marketing. But nothing goes back to horse racing. The next one this year was really interesting. DraftKings, at their Scarlet Pearl Casino in Mississippi, decided to put up a Kentucky Derby future book. We see this in Las Vegas. And it resulted in a cease and desist by Churchill Downs, and they were citing the Interstate Horse Racing Act. They did not have consent to offer this, and it had stopped. So this is what we've seen fixed odds so far in America. So it begs to ask the question, and we've asked it this morning, we've continued to ask it, should America allow fixed odds wagering on horse racing? Let's look at some of our stats. And I think history always helps us. So these are the handle figures that the Jockey Club puts out. And we're looking at the last 10 years. I didn't have the 2018. And I've heard people look at these stats and say, well, we've leveled off. It's not going down that much anymore. Woo-hoo. But I'd look at it and say, we've been stagnant for the last 7 years. It's not very healthy for any business to say you've been stagnant for 7 years. Also, another trend in horse racing that we haven't broken out, and it's very difficult to break out of these stats, is how much handle is coming from the international market. We've seen in the last 4 or 5 years a lot more international jurisdictions being able to commingle into our pools. And without the stats, it's hard for me to give you that number, but I can tell you it's probably a very significant number. And without knowing that, we don't know how much decline we've seen in the U.S. market because it's coming in from other sources. The next trend that's most interesting to all of you is purses. And they have been very steady for the last 10 years. And the ratio of our handle to purses in the U.S. is higher than the ratio in Australia, in the UK. We're feeling pretty good looking at this, but we shouldn't be feeling good. Because what we don't break down in these numbers is how much of this is coming from the VLT contributions. We've had a lot of discussions about states that have taken away pieces, percentages of how much of the VLTs that are going into purses. We've also seen saturation with so many racinos that the VLTs are not performing as well as they were at an earlier time. You know, that's going down, but it's still contributing. And one of the better stories for horse racing has been historic horse racing and what that's adding. We learned at lunchtime what's happening in Virginia because of HHR. Corey Johnson told us earlier this morning that in Kentucky, HHR contributed to $30 million in purses last year. So between those two factors, our purses are propped up. They're not coming from people just wagering on horses running in an oval. And we need to be very cognizant of this trend. And the last trend we'll look at from U.S. horse racing is, over the last 10 years, the number of races has decreased. And we all know the economic reasons for that. We've had decline in foal crops. The economies of training and owning horses are difficult. We're in the era of the super trainer. We know that many facilities don't want to run as many races because of the cost. So this is where we are. This last year, we were at 36,586 races, which is still a high number. Now let's look at another country. Let's look at Australia. They have a great betting culture. They seem to have a betting pub. I call it a betting pub. It's a pub with betting on every corner. They start betting very young. They've always had bookmakers on course. That's their history, fixed odds on course. In the 1980s, pari-mutuel wagering kind of increased because the operator Tabcorp had expanded the number of shops with pari-mutuel wagering. And then in the 2000s, we became the era of internet wagering. So it was much easier for punters to make wagers on fixed odds through the internet. So in 2008, Australia came up with some legislation called race field legislation. And it requires bookmakers to have a deal with the racing authority in whatever state to use the thoroughbred race field information, and that's program information. And when they use that information to accept or facilitate wagering, they have to pay the racing organization for that. And this legislation held up in court. It was challenged It's held up. It can't exceed 4% of the operator's wagering turnover. And it's a sliding scale depending upon the operator pays, depending upon what the quality of the purse level is at that day's meeting. So it could be anywhere from 2.5% of turnover to 3.5% to 4%. And if you look at their stats, which I can look at them here, this is from 2012 to the 2017. And the yellow was pari-mutuel wagering. As you can see, it was higher. The gray was fixed odds. And what's in blue is total wagering. It's an interesting trend here because we see on the slide that the total wagering on horse racing continues to go up, and it's shifting away from pari-mutuel to fixed odds. The other thing that's more telling in this jurisdiction is that over this time, the purses saw a 21% cumulative growth. So we did not cannibalize this market. The number of races stayed steady. It's a really good example showing how both fixed odds and pari-mutuel can live, but it is predicated on the economic model between the racetracks, racing authorities, and the bookmakers. Now we're going to look at another picture that's not as pretty. This is the United Kingdom, and we're going to look at both flat and jump racing. And the blue is pari-mutuel wagering, and the orange is fixed odds. There is not a contractual relationship between the betting shops and British racing. It's an enshrined horse racing betting levy. It's 10% of gross win on bets placed on British horse racing by residents of Britain. They don't get anything on foreign racing. That is not enough to sustain, the return is not enough to sustain the industry. They supplement it with media, picture, data rights sold to the bookmakers. And they do have pool betting, and the pool betting, or tote betting as we know it, is usually the most popular on exotic bets that they don't offer through the bookmakers. To make matters even worse in the UK, is in April, there's a new law coming into play where the government has lowered the maximum bet on a fixed odds terminal. Nothing to do with horse racing, a fixed odds terminal, and it's to protect underage betting. And that number went from £100 to £2. And what this results in is there's going to be a lot of closing of some betting shops. And these betting shops offered the fob tees, they offered horse racing, they offered other fixed odds products. And with these betting shops closing, it means less revenue to racing. And that equals purse cuts. On March 5th, we saw a boycott of racing by trainers and owners at Lingfield. The bottom level of purses are just not where it should be. And one of the other issues in the UK, where they love horse racing, I mean, look at how much wagering is happening in the UK. It's on 2 TV channels. They love it, but the industry is struggling economically. And a lot of times the bookmakers, they use horse racing as a marketing product. It's a loss leader. They use it to gain bettors to come in, and they're going to bet on better products that they have a higher yield on. And the industry has no control over that. So they get their 10% levy on gross win, they sell their media and data rights, but they're not sharing in the control of the product. So this is a scary slide when we talk about fixed odds. But it's not all doom and gloom. Let's talk about why are fixed odds attractive. Everyone has said this today with the public, they want fixed odds, but why? Well, the first reason is pretty simple. It's a guarantee of the odds when the wager is placed. You know what you get. Yeah, customers, they don't trust late odds shift. We've talked about that quite a bit in our industry. You get more propositions, longer lead time to wager on races, and more betting activity. It appeals to younger and casual bettors, and it's really easy to understand, especially in the context of sports wagering. And more importantly, The customer is becoming very price sensitive, and sports wagering is going to usher that in. The takeout is really high in parimutuel compared to sports, and while bettors may not quite understand why, they feel it, and they know what they get back. So the challenge for our industry in deciding whether we offer fixed odds or we don't offer fixed odds is simple. Are we going to have incremental growth, or are we going to cannibalize what betting we already have on parimutuel? Check the stat. This is more looking at the Australian market. Approximately 2.5 times as much turnover on fixed odds is needed to achieve the same net as in the parimutuel takeout. And that changes from market to market depending upon their economic deal with the bookmakers. So that can be higher in some jurisdictions or lower. So it takes more bets to get the same amount. But you can offer wagers that are not commercially attractive on the tote. Parlays, head-to-head, favorite versus field, jockey challenges. And I've had people say, but we can offer that on the tote. We can technically offer it on the tote, but it's not commercially attractive to bettors. And what does fixed odds get us as an industry? Well, we've seen a trend of OTBs closing. We've seen ADWs consolidating. We've seen racetracks without alternative gaming revenue struggling. And what fixed odds could potentially bring to us is an expanded distribution. We're competing for the wagering entertainment dollar. And by having more options and more distribution, we're in more places in the marketplace. One way to do this, as we've looked at the two models, would be to have an agreement with the bookmakers. And we can talk about the race field legislation in Australia. But we have to be really careful as we're looking at this that we don't restrict the market, but we take a clip in the ticket in an equitable way for both parties. It has to be fair for the bookmaker, and it has to be fair for the industry. So a model based on turnover is ideal. And one thing we see in the UK is that they do work with the bookmakers to develop new markets. And this is not just a matter of, well, let's give it to them and it's going to be great for our industry. It's about working with them to promote horse racing. And in the UK, they have the Racing and Betting Liaison Group, and they work with betting operators to try to drive improvements. And in the US, if we consider any type of fixed odds, we need to also think about the plan that revolves around that. So this is where it always gets sticky when we start talking about the regulatory environment, and there were some questions in an earlier panel about how this would work. There's a couple ways it could go down. The first one would be that the state sports legislations enable it. It's just part of the bill, it's another sport, and that would mean that only licensed sports operators could offer fixed odds on horse racing. And that's okay if the racetracks have the ability to offer sports wagering, they can also offer fixed odds wagering. And many of the laws that we have are parimutuel only. So that would mean, for those racetracks that maybe don't have sports wagering, that the rules would need to be amended on a state basis. And in some states, it would require legislation to change from parimutuel to include also fixed odds. With fixed odds means more wagers, means more distribution, which means more demand for oversight. And we have to keep that in mind, that we're looking at the oversight and the integrity of our industry will be more important than ever. This is another kind of, I think this is a little radical. We haven't spoken about this. There's another way we could go about fixed odds in America if we don't just do a deal with the bookmakers or the sports operators. There's emerging technology and managed services that could allow the U.S. racing industry to own the fixed odds vertical. And what does that mean? Well, that means we become the bookmaker. We become the risk manager. And we distribute to sports operators, to our own racetracks, kind of the back-end product. And the reason why I bring this up, if we establish a model where a third-party betting operator handles all the betting, rather than us in the industry, whether it's a racetrack or the industry as a whole, there's a danger that we're going to be limited in the value of what gets returned to racing. So I put this out. And how would that work? Well, there's technology out there that's based on financial market making mathematical models. And it takes into consideration historic results, track stats, PPs. Here's an example. This is a favorite versus field, balancing of a book. This is, and then head-to-head. This kind of technology is already used by sophisticated bettors to identify inefficiencies in the market. And their system often prices horses differently than the tote would. And if you turn this technology around, you can use it to basically balance your book. You know, how traditional bookmakers work today on horse racing is it's very trader heavy. They have technologies and they use them, and they compare to other bookmakers what the price this one has and that one has, and they all kind of move to be competitive but it's not economical if you're going to be pricing a lot of races. You know, it's one thing if we're only going to do Grade 1 stakes, Kentucky Derby Day, that can pretty much be done manually and the risk be managed pretty easily. But if we look in America to potentially pricing all of our races, and I don't just mean the win, I'm talking about all these propositions, we're going to need a technology solution that helps us manage that book. And I've worked with a company, and this isn't a sales pitch, but there's many out there. This is a company in Australia that has created this technology for bookmakers for a different avenue. So what is our current situation? We have an explosion of sports betting in the U.S. And we keep asking ourselves, is it a threat or is it a complement to horse racing? We seem to be waiting to find out, where we really should be positioning ourselves to use it to our advantage. We need to move, not wait. The next question is, and this can go along with the situation at Santa Anita, sports wagering coming on, is horse racing still relevant in our society? Will people even want to bet on it once we launch it? You know, these are some questions we need to ask, and it talks to me about the need for not only offering new forms of wagering, but educating and marketing our sport in a better way. We already see, and I don't know how much you're aware of it, that U.S. tracks already sell their signals to other countries for fixed odds betting. It's happening now. It's a very, very healthy market in the UK and Europe for betting on U.S. thoroughbred racing. I should now ask the question, how much of that comes back to us for purses? Probably nothing, because it does not fall under the Interstate Horse Racing Act. That's considered a commission to the racetrack. Could be for their picture, could be for their data, but it's happening. So if we don't embrace fixed odds and figure out a model within our own industry, how we can offer it in America, well, what is going to prevent these other jurisdictions from allowing U.S. bookmakers to bring in fixed odds on races from other countries? They already take our wagering, and we've talked about this time during the day that there's a lull, that these bookmakers are looking for product. I would venture to guess that at some point, once they figure out sports wagering, it seems like right now, everyone's just trying to get it passed. They're trying to work out their models. They're trying to figure out how we're going to bet on football. But once the market starts to mature, they're going to be looking for more products. And they're going to be looking at what else they can do. And they're going to be looking, can we fill in with horse racing? And, well, the U.S. people won't play ball. They claim they have an Interstate Horse Racing Act. So let's just bring some product over maybe from the U.K. I mean, they'd like to have a little extra media rights revenue. Bring them from South Africa or whoever will sell it to them. And finally, in our current situation is that one of the most important things we need to do as an industry is to maintain control of our own product, but not restrict opportunity. It's really naive to think that we can protect the parimutuel product globally. It's going to change, and we need, as an industry, to become part of that change. So back to the front. What happens if we do nothing? And I think one of the things I didn't say earlier that I'd like to bring up is, when the NFL went on national television and horse racing was booming at the time and held a monopoly, that we didn't want to put our sport on television because, well, what would happen? Someone could illegally start taking bets. And that has always pointed to the beginning of the horse industry becoming less popular because of lack of distribution. And here we are standing here saying, well, we could have fixed odds, but I don't know, I don't want to give up that takeout. And if we do, it's just going to be a repeat. Here's another opportunity that we miss. So I guess I'm going to open up the floor for comments, questions, ideas. I knew I could depend on you, Patrick.
Michele, the slide you showed of that Australian entity that's doing what they're doing, trying to identify the market. If you were to flip the script on that and say, what are the professional bettors doing? They're essentially doing that in any market they participate in right now.
That is exactly right. And that's how this kind of technology came to be.
So when you take the approach of how does racing kind of fill in the gaps, as an industry, we've been very focused on first post, 1245 to 1255, in that ballpark. Is there, there's an opportunity, not just domestically, but really globally, for some tracks to become outliers and push and say, one day a week we're going to start running at 9:30 in the morning. Now, that's going to change the dynamic for how horses train on that day. But can we try and fill that space? Because one of the things I've heard in sports betting is that the operators are considering, the leagues, the teams are considering spreading out start times a little bit more to gain more exposure for certain groups within that. Do you think racing has a chance?
The dialogue we should be having is with the bookmakers. You're absolutely right. If we're going to be offering our products to the fixed odds bookmaking market, these are conversations we have. A good example from the parimutuel side of a track looking globally to increase their revenue would be Yonkers Raceway. And I don't know how many of you know this story, but they have great purses, they don't have a racino, but racing wasn't getting a whole lot of play. And thanks to both their management and to Alex Dodoyan, they came up with an idea where they were going to market their harness racing in France to the PMU, where the PMU market is so strong that they're able to do B pools. They don't have to be commingled, but they convinced these people to commingle, come into our pool. It wasn't a legal issue. They convinced them to commingle. They do that today. Yonkers went on to create a website in French to help educate people how to bet on their product. They moved their post times. See, I'm getting to your point here, Patrick. They moved their post times to find out what fit in the France marketplace. And it's been very successful. And I've looked at the numbers, and a majority of the pool, the commingled pool, is coming from France right now. So that's a great example of working with a jurisdiction that needed a product and finding out when they needed it. They knew they'd get more money in, and they adjusted it. Of course, there was people at home like, well, why are you running it this time? You used to run it that time. But the net at the end of the day was positive. So I think we have to be open to what the market needs. And that requires a conversation with all the players in the market. Maybe we can try to have post times set just between our races, not on top of each other first. Then talk about NFL games, but... One step at a time. Yes, Brian. There's a lot of them. It can be margin of victory, head-to-head, two horses, one horse against another horse. It could be favorite versus the field. It could be a jockey challenge where you look at, well, how many races will Jose Ortiz win on the Aqueduct card today? You could take all the riders and add up points. And it's endless what you can bet on. And again, what I was showing here is it's important that we're adding more bets. We're not cannibalizing just the win pool. You know, we're adding more opportunities to wager on horse racing that are kind of interesting.
So you could actually wager on how long it takes the stewards to make a decision.
We could. But who's going to monitor that integrity?
Michelle, I don't know if this would, I found this very interesting coming out of New Jersey. I defined it as a prop bet, but New Jersey, Brian, was putting a race or two horse races in with a baseball game.
A parlay, yes.
So for me, it was kind of a prop exotic, if you will, but I thought that was a very interesting way of encouraging people to also look at betting on a horse race. So to me, that was pretty innovative. I still find it as a prop.
And that's working with the operators, because this all comes down to marketing. Just because we offer it, we still have to provide the support to the operators, whether it's data support, whether it's their picture, it's how we present, the times. You know, there's much more than just offering fixed odds. Yes?
In those states that only permit pari-mutuel wagering, what's the alternative to doing that?
Well, as I said, if that state gets sports wagering, it could fall under there. And if the way the rules are written, they do not have fixed odds written in, you need to start working on how to write it in. And instead, it may be a rule change, it may be a legislative change, but you need to look at that from state to state.
It may be a constitutional change.
It could be. But it's a good time, though, to look at every sports legislation and have horse racing in there. So that those operators, because if you think about it, if it falls under the sports operators, it's only able to be offered where the sports operators work, wherever they're allowed to offer wagering. If it's only at racetracks as part of the horse racing rules, then they can't offer it from the bookmakers. So we need kind of both. It's going to be a hybrid model. And
If you had fixed wagering at the racetrack, what would be a good division of the win between the track and the horses?
well, that's a tough question. You know, I think we need to look at the overall economic model. Remember, the margins on sports or fixed odds wagering are very small. So we're not going to look at a higher takeout like we receive in pari-mutuel. You're probably looking at anywhere between, on turnover, we want on turnover, not gross win, we're looking at maybe 2 to 4% on turnover, depending on the quality of the racing. You know, they do struggle, for instance, in Australia, they struggle with the turnover on some of the less quality races, and so they pay less for that, and then the grade 1 days they pay a little bit more for. So it's just like host fees. And it's, you know, what holds the most interest for the punter or the bettor. Yes?
Who establishes the fixed odds?
So it's whoever is the risk taker, the bookmaker. So the example that I showed there, if you're trying to do a lot of races, you can do it through mathematical models or a combination. So, you know, just like when you're doing that many, you can't necessarily have human beings do all of them. Bigger races, maybe it's a combination. Yes?
So when does the bet or the betting stop? Like
they will stop at the same time pari-mutuel does. But the difference is they're able to take wagers a lot sooner. You're looking at potentially when the races are drawn to be able to start putting odds out into the market and players start placing bets on those races, which is a difference. Yes?
When you're talking about bets such as a margin of victory,
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about like an over-under, where there would be 2 bets, or like a range, or like between
It's a range. It's good.
lengths 3 and 5?
Yeah, there's odds for if it's a length. It's an odd.
Or an over-under, or?
No, it would be looking at the fixed odds for the margin of victory being a nose, the fixed odds for the margin of victory being a neck, a length. So each one would have a separate set of odds.
So you could have fractions like a length and a half or a length and 3/4?
Yeah, anything they want to put up.
Okay.
Exactly. It can be, or it could be over a certain number, under a certain number. It's pretty endless. But the bookmakers, looking at the risk management, they see what bets work, and sometimes it's a little trial by error what they're getting takers on, but they'll set out those bets. Patrick.
Just to add, the one thing I've heard out of Vegas most recently is that it used to be that the bettor was focused on the market that the book was setting.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because the book was required, they were keeping track of their liabilities very carefully and understanding where things were, so they would offer certain markets. But at this point, machine learning is getting so good. The intelligence within technology is such that the customers can, and they're already doing this in some places in Europe, customers can start asking the book, I want Curry 35 points tonight, I want Draymond Green 10 rebounds, and I want the Warriors under. I want that parlay. You're not offering it right now. I want that. What's the price on that? And they're able to turn it around, essentially instantaneously. That we can't necessarily be thinking of this as limiting to a certain series of possibilities. That we could get to a point where the customers could come to us as
Yep.
us as the overall, and basically name what they want.
Right.
You could say, give me
And you choose,
lengths margin of victory. That's not on the board, but give offer me that. What are the chances of that happening?
right. And then it's up to the bookmaker to say, I'll take this bet at this. It's just like you and I have a bet, and I say, well, Pat, I'm going to give these odds to you, and you're like, no, you're crazy. But you're going to entertain that with me. Same thing.
When we look at racetracks or horse organizations wanting to offer this odds product, you ask yourself, do they have legal authority to do it? And it varies by state, et cetera. But where does fixed odds racing fall within a definition? I mean, is this a casino style gaming? Is it a game of chance? It's not pari-mutuel. I mean, where do we come up with if we want to find a definition? Where does it fall?
It falls most likely under sports wagering. It's a set price that continues. The bookmakers can continue to adjust throughout the day and times leading up to the event. So it falls under sports wagering. Well, that's what's getting passed from state to state. So it falls in its own category.
So it doesn't fall within the definition of games of chance.
No. No. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody, all of our panelists, and guest speakers, and certainly everybody that attended today. I think it's been a great day. It's been a day to certainly make you think, but I hope it also gives you something to think about for positive movement and continuing to find ways to do things better. So thank you guys. We'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Thank you.